Tucked into the steep shadowed hillsides outside of Bergen is a valley that has made people uneasy for centuries. Isdalen looks harmless enough on a map, but once you're on those narrow paths, the ground drops fast, and the fog doesn't give you any warning. It didn't take long for locals to give it a darker nickname. They started calling it the Valley of Death. Back in the Middle Ages, people in the region talked about Isdalen as a place that someone might go if they didn't plan on returning home. Suicide carried a heavy shame in medieval Scandinavia, so families didn't record those deaths in any official sense. What survived were stories that moved from one household to another. Someone would disappear into the valley, and then word would spread once their body had been found. Those accounts settled into the area's reputation, and the nickname just kind of stuck. Even now, the valley hasn't shaken that history. The terrain is cold, narrow, and awkward to move through, and hikers have gotten into trouble when the weather has turned or when a step went wrong. In the 1960s, a group of hikers vanished into the fog and met their deaths. Medieval suicides and tragic hiking stories aside, the area's reputation only grew when a mysterious woman's burnt body was discovered. Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown. From cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path. Cold War espionage ran on nerves, instinct, and a whole lot of people trying to figure out what the other side was building behind closed doors. From 1947 to 1991, the U.S. and its Western allies were watching the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact with a kind of attention that usually is reserved for feuding neighbors who share a fence. Agencies like the CIA and the KGB became the names everyone remembers, but they weren't the only ones in the game. Military units, analysis, code breakers, and a rotating cast of specialists all had their hands in gathering whatever scraps of information they could get. All of this emerged from the spy work that had already been happening during World War II, especially around nuclear research. Both sides had been racing to understand atomic weapons long before Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Once the war ended, the Soviet Union walked away with a new territory and a growing sense of power, and the United States wasn't about to ignore that. Even though the two countries never fired direct shots at each other, they spent decades preparing for the possibility that one wrong move could turn into a nuclear disaster. That fear made information feel like currency, and the only way to get it was to send real people into risky situations. Spies at that time didn't have satellites or digital surveillance to lean on like we do now. They had disguises, forged documents, and whatever tricks they could carry in a pocket. Some had been active since the late 1930s, and many kept going well into the 1960s. They intercepted coded messages, slipped into places they shouldn't have been, and tried to stay one step ahead of whoever might be watching. The job came with a strange mix of glam and danger, which is probably why it inspired so many novels and movies. Moscow during the Cold War was its own world. The KGB watched everything, and people learned to keep their thoughts to themselves. In February of 1978, Gus Hathaway, the CIA's Moscow station chief, was driving home from the U.S. Embassy when a man tapped on his car window at a gas station. Hathaway had been a part of the CIA since the early days, and he knew better than to brush off a stranger who approached him in that particular city. Washington had a freeze order on recruiting new agents after several major losses, but Hathaway understood that opportunities didn't wait for permission. The man who approached him was Adolf Tokachov, an engineer who had grown deeply frustrated with the Soviet system. Over the next 7 years, he passed along an astonishing amount of material. His reports helped the U.S. understand the Soviets' aviation and the weapons development, and the value of what he provided earned him the nickname the $1 Billion Spy. Hathaway and a small circle inside the CIA handled him with extreme caution, keeping his identity locked down so tightly that only a few people ever knew his name at the time. In 1985, everything collapsed. The KGB discovered who he was, and the reason almost certainly came from inside the CIA itself. Two American officers, one named Aldrich Ames, had been secretly feeding information to the Soviets, and once Tokachov's name reached the wrong desk, well, his fate was sealed. He was arrested, questioned, and then executed. His story became one of the most striking examples of how personal choices, political pressure, and long-running ideological battles collided during the Cold War. The ideas of that ideological clash stretch back to 1917, when the Bolsheviks took control of Russia and built a state centered on strict communist rule. The United States represented the opposite economic system, and the tension between those two visions only grew. During the Second World War, the two countries worked together because they had a bigger enemy to fight, but the cooperation never ran that deep. By 1947, President Harry Truman made it official with the Truman Doctrine, which committed the U.S. to pushing back against Soviet influence around the world. From that point on, the rivalry shaped nearly everything. Both sides built alliances, backed proxy conflicts, and poured staggering amounts of money into nuclear weapons. In 1949, when the Soviet Union tested its first atomic bomb, the arms race kicked into high gear. Each country wanted to know exactly what the other was planning, and spies became essential. Some were motivated by ideology, others by resentment, money, or personal conflict. But whatever the reasons, they helped fuel one of the most intense intelligence battles in modern history. That brings us to today's case. It was the morning of November 29, 1970, when a man and his two daughters headed out for a hike near the north face of El Reckon. They were moving through the foothills of Isdalen, following a path that they knew well enough, when something on the ground ahead of them stopped the entire group. At first, it looked like someone laying among the rocks, but as they got closer, the shape of what they were looking at didn't really make much sense. The two daughters were the first to understand what they were looking at. A woman's body on its back in a small rocky clearing, burned so badly that her features were gone. Her arms were raised in front of her in a stiff, bent posture that happens when a body has been exposed to intense heat. Her head was pointed downhill, almost as if she had ended up in that position by sliding into the spot where she was found. The dad took in the scene long enough to realize that this wasn't something he could handle on his own, so the three of them left the valley to get help, and the discovery in Isdalen set off one of the most puzzling investigations Norway has ever seen. When police arrive, they can tell that the front of the body has been badly burned, but the rest of her body, like underneath, looks weirdly untouched. Her arms were in a classic boxer pose, as it's common with severely burnt bodies. Due to the extensive burns, her face was unrecognizable. From what remained of her clothing, it looked like she was wearing just regular street clothing, definitely not the kind of outfit that someone would wear to go hiking. And even though her back was untouched, it's clear to investigators that she wasn't just carried here after the fact. The whole place smells like char and burnt flesh. But other than the burns on her body, there isn't any signs of fire anywhere, like no charred logs or even a fuel container. The investigators found several items at the scene that were arranged in a very odd way, almost as if someone were setting up a tiny, creepy yard sale. The items included a watch on her wrist that was set for 10:10 but didn't seem to have actually ever been used. Jewelry, including a ring and some earrings, which were not on her body but rather placed beside her. An umbrella, a purse which did not contain any identification, a matchbook, nylon stockings, a wool sweater, a melted rubber boot, a scarf, 2 shriveled up plastic water bottles, a plastic passport holder minus the passport, an empty bottle of St. Havard's liquor, a few scraps of burnt paper, and a fur hat with traces of petrol, which traces of this could also be found underneath her body as well. And as if the scene wasn't already weird, the police discovered that every single piece of clothing had the label cut out, and all the containers also had their labels rubbed off. Without any identification and with her body being so badly burned, what they were able to determine was that she was about 5'4" with long dark hair. She had a small round face with small ears and brown eyes. She had her hair tied back with a blue and white ribbon, and she was likely between 25 and 40 years old. Because they didn't have a name for her, she became the Isdal woman. During the autopsy, a pathologist notes a bruise on the right side of her neck, and it isn't from a fall or a hit. There are no signs of illness, no long-term medical issues, and no pregnancy. There is petrol present on her body, and soot is found in her lungs, which shows that she was breathing during the fire. She was absolutely burned alive. As if that isn't horrific enough, her stomach contains between 50 and 70 phenobarbital pills. Most of them are still in her stomach, so she took them shortly before the fire. No one can say for sure whether she took them willingly or if someone made her swallow them, but these type of pills were a common overdose drug for women at the time. Although the amount that was in her blood system was not enough to kill her. Her blood also showed high levels of carbon monoxide, which lines up with the soot in her lungs. That suggests that she was unconscious or close to it when the fire started. She had distinctive gold dental work, 17 of her teeth. Investigators removed her jaw to preserve it in hopes that it might help identify her later. Her dental work at the time looked like it could have been done in Asia, or possibly South America, or Southern Europe, which does not narrow anything down. And along with her teeth and jaw, tissue samples from her organs were also taken so they could be examined again if someone eventually came forward. With all of this, the Bergen police are like, okay, this is getting really weird. So they call in big deal crime nerds in Oslo, the National Investigation Service, also known as Kripos, appropriately named. Together, they start digging into who this mystery woman actually was. The first stop were her fingerprints. They run her prints through every police registry they've got, expecting at least something to pop up, but nope, nada. Nothing. Not even a, hey, she once jaywalked. So they pivot, because if she isn't in the system, maybe her stuff is. And they start checking unclaimed luggage at train stations and bus depots, basically playing detective bingo. And on December 2nd, they hit the jackpot. There are 2 suitcases sitting in the left luggage section at the Bergen railway station that match what they're looking for. When they open them, it's immediately clear that someone has gone out of their way to rip any identification away. The suitcases are full of sophisticated, well-made clothing, but like the crime scene, every single tag has been cut out. There are several wigs, a pair of non-prescription glasses with a pair of sunglasses. Both are clearly used to change how she looks. Most of the items have had their fingerprints wiped off, but one pair of glasses they find a partial print that matches the woman from Isdalen. There is German and Norwegian money plus Belgium, Britain, and Switzerland coins. There's about 500 German marks in total and about 100 Norwegian marks hidden in the lining of one suitcase. There are shoes from Rome, a hair comb, and a hairbrush, but the brand name on those has been wiped away as well. Same with the makeup, all the labels have been removed. A tub of eczema cream with the prescription sticker scraped off, a compass, a railway map, some teaspoons, and a metal spoon with an engraving. Almost nothing is labeled, but the items that still carry any kind of brand are a matchbook from a German mail-order erotic underwear company and the engraved spoon, as well as the Roman shoe. In fact, there is a bag from the shoe store. In one suitcase, there's a notepad covered in dates, letters, and numbers that look like some kind of code. But until they figure it out, the police can't say what it represents, so they follow the one lead that leads them to a specific place. The plastic shopping bag from Oscar Rovet's footwear store in Stavanger. From the moment the investigators walk into the footwear store, the owner's son, Rolf, is like, oh yeah, I know exactly who you're talking about. Like, no hesitation. This woman made an impression. He tells police that she had dark hair and dressed really well and wasn't just grabbing the first pair of boots that she saw. She studied them like she was choosing a sidekick. She spent ages deciding, left without buying anything, and then came back the next day to finally pick the pair she wanted. He even remembered the color of the headband she had on and the shoe size because she was that memorable. He tells police that her skin was golden, which isn't something he saw often in Stavanger. She spoke English, but with an accent that he couldn't pin down, and at one point she slipped into something that sounded German or maybe French. He wasn't totally sure, but he just knew it wasn't Norwegian. And then she had this smell about her. He tells police that she had this spicy scent around her, something he couldn't identify at the time. Later, investigators decided it was garlic, which wasn't exactly a pantry staple in the area back then. Between the accent, the clothes, the garlic, and the way she carried herself, it was clear that she was a foreigner. Police take all this information and they decide that if she bought shoes in the area, maybe she was also staying in the area, so they head straight to the hotels. Their first stop, and the hotel receptionist doesn't even need a second to think about it. She remembers a woman checking in on November 9th and staying until the 18th under the name Fernella Lorch. She remembers the gold dental work, the fur hat, the whole polished look. Was this possibly the hat that was found at the crime scene? Could be. The receptionist also remembers calling a taxi for her on the 18th. So the police track down the driver, and he tells them that he dropped her off at the harbor, where she boarded a high-speed boat headed for Bergen. That gives them a straight line to follow, so they head back to Bergen to dig through the hotel records. The only problem is when they get back to Bergen, they can't find anyone at any hotel under the name Fernella Lorch. So they go back to her suitcase. That notepad that was covered in letters and numbers finally gets some attention. They compare the handwriting in that notebook to the registrations in the hotels. And handwriting starts popping up all over the place. On December 9th, they get their first confirmed match, the same handwriting, but it's a different name. Then another, and another. By the time they're done, they've got at least 8 different aliases tied to one woman. There is Genevieve Lancer from Louvain, Claudia Telt from Brussels, with an address on Rue de la Madeleine and Place St. Walburg, Claudia Nelson from Ghent, supposedly living on Rue St. Walburg. There's Alexandria Zarna Marches from Ljubljana, with an address of Rue St. Hildegard. Alexa Zarna Marches from Ljubljana, with the address of Rue St. Hildegard. Vera Jarel from Antwerp. Fernella Lorch from Belgium. And Elizabeth Lienhauer from Oosten, with an address of Philip Stock Street in Brussels. Almost every street name turned out to be fake except for Rue de la Madeleine. And on every single form, she writes that she is a Belgian citizen. The forms are filled out in German or French, but they look into the passport numbers, and the numbers don't match any real Belgian citizen. So now they know that Fernella is an alias, and she had a whole collection of identities to go with it. With this information, they can now map out her movements, and it turns into a full tour. She spends time in Norway in March and April of 1970, and then again in October and November of that same year. Sometimes she stays one night, sometimes she settles in for over a week. She pays cash everywhere. She tells hotel staff that she's a traveling saleswoman, or sometimes she's an antiques dealer. At more than one hotel, she asked to change rooms after checking in, and at one point she had swapped rooms repeatedly during one single stay. And the staff remember more than just the paperwork. Several people mention that she wore wigs. Some remember her speaking English, then switching to German, while others say that she sounded like she was speaking Flemish, or a slightly off version of English. More than one person mentions the smell of garlic. In Bergen at the Hotel Neptune, the waitress Elfhide Rangeness remembers her clearly. Elfhide was 21 at the time, and this woman walks into the dining room looking like she stepped straight out of a fashion magazine. Elegant, confident, perfectly put together. Elfhide remembers her wink, like a quick, "Yes, I see you staring." One evening, Elfite serves her while she's sitting at a table right next to two German Navy men. One of them is an officer. She doesn't talk to them, but she's right there. Between the notepad, the hotel cards, the names, the fake addresses, the Belgian story, the languages, the wigs, the room changes, the cash, the garlic trail, the police no longer think that they're dealing with a woman on a simple holiday. And they start to wonder if maybe she was either very rich and running away from something, or maybe she was a spy. At this point, the spy rumors are basically running their own ecosystem. Bergen didn't get many foreign visitors in the 1970s, so a woman who looked wealthy, hopped between cities, and checked into hotels under a whole collection of names had people talking non-stop. A crime author named Gunnar Staalesen remembers the buzz from when he was a university student. He said Norway had all kind of intelligence activity going on. Russian agents, Western agents, Israel agents, everyone had someone in the country. Remember, this is 1970 and the Cold War is running full speed, and Norway is sitting in a very interesting spot on the map. They're tight with the United States and Great Britain, they helped found NATO, and they also share a 120-mile border with Russia. Because of that setup, the country is crawling with intelligence people. Everyone had someone in Norway during this period. In fact, a few years after this case, Mossad even killed the wrong man in Lillehammer, so the idea of foreign intelligence moving around Norway wasn't surprising to anyone. But if you look at how she behaved, it gets a little messy. If she was a spy, she wasn't exactly a good one. She wore fancy clothing, she moved furniture around in her hotel rooms. One hotel, she dragged an armchair around. In another, she shifted the table. A former employee told the BBC's Death in Ice Valley podcast team that she would even put furniture out in the hallway while she was in the room and then bring it back in before she left. Remember, she also asked to change rooms a lot, not once or twice. This was a habit. And she wasn't traveling solo either. People kept seeing her with different men. One waitress remembers her having dinner with a gray-haired man. They sat at the same table, didn't say a word to each other, and at one point she slid a sheet of paper across the table. In another hotel, a housekeeper walked in and found her sitting on the bed while a blonde man was on the couch. Neither of them spoke the entire time the housekeeper was in the room. In a home furnishing shop in Bergen, she was spotted shopping for a wall mirror with a man with dark hair. The shopkeeper heard them speaking in a language that she didn't recognize. The woman had curly hair during that sighting, so she was probably wearing a wig. It's not clear how hard the police tried to track down these men. Years later, a journalist reported that these interviews and witness statements weren't even included in the official police files. What nobody knew at the time was that the Norwegian intelligence was also paying attention to her, although they didn't admit it until decades later. According to the NRK, which is a government-owned radio and television public broadcasting company called Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation, security services were interested in reports that she had been seen watching military rocket tests in West Norway. Their files didn't land on a clear answer, but they were definitely looking into it. Meanwhile, the police finally get somewhere with the notepad from her suitcase. That weird code, as it turns out, it isn't a spy code. It's her own shorthand for traveling dates. 022-028P lines up with Paris from October 22nd to the 28th. 029PS is her trip from Paris to Stavanger. 029S is her arrival in Stavanger on October 29th. 030BN5 is Bergen in October from the 30th to November 5th. Once they figured out how she wrote these entries, the whole page started matching up with the hotel stays that they had from the registrations. And the police already had their own list of movements for 1970, so they already knew that she had been in Paris, this time under the name of Vera Slossenek. Not one hotel, two, both in the same week, about a month before she died. She had also made a little detour in Switzerland. On April 1st in 1970, she bought a train ticket from Stavanger to Basel at 1:35 in the afternoon. That trip took at least a full day, including a rail ferry. From Basel, Geneva was right there, and Geneva suddenly becomes a whole new thread because one of her suitcases held a sewing kit from the Hotel Regina. This wasn't a random place. It sat on Quai Mont Blanc, right on the lake, one of the best addresses in the city. Her luggage also had 5.5 Swiss francs mixed in with the other currencies that she carried. And her notepad backs all of this up. Her March entries match Oslo and Bergen. Her October entries match Paris. The police hotel list confirms that she stayed at the Calais and the Atona Hotel during that Paris trip. Her note from October 29th matches her onward journey from Paris to Stavanger, and the police have the SAS ticket and the Stavanger hotel form to match it. Now, there were a couple of shorthand entries that the police aren't quite sure what they meant. They are 20M23MO and 24M31MB. Now, the Bergen investigators, they wanted to follow up on these leads back in the 1970s. They had planned to go to Paris, and they had planned to go to Geneva and ask questions at the Hotel Regina. They wanted to know whether she traveled alone or met someone there, but none of that happened. Several officers later said that they were stopped from traveling by Norwegian intelligence. They said that the case left a bad taste for people working it. They felt like someone above them was trying to slow them down or block them entirely. On December 21st, 1970, the police hold a press conference, and the announcement catches everyone off guard. The criminal commissioner says that they have ruled out the idea that she was a spy. He doesn't explain how they reached that conclusion or who she actually was, and he also goes on to say that she was definitely not murdered. A couple of days later, the Bergen police chief issues a statement confirming that her death is a suicide, and case closed. A few weeks later, on the 7th of January in 1971, her final autopsy report is released to the public. The cause of death is listed as suicide through a combination of sleeping pills and carbon monoxide poisoning. That leaves a long list of questions. If she was planning to end her life with pills, why set herself on fire? If the plan was to hide her identity, why take the pills at all? And the scene itself raises more confusion. There was no fluid container anywhere near the body, even though petrol was found on her skin and on her clothing. Someone had to have cleaned up the scene, and if someone did, who? It feels like the case was being pushed aside pretty quickly, and if so, why? On February 5th, 1971, she is buried in the Mollendal Cemetery in Bergen. The police chose Catholic rites because she used saints' names on her hotel forms. 16 officers attended her funeral. She was placed in a white, zinc-lined coffin so that her remains would be preserved for as long as possible in case someone came forward. They also saved tissue samples from her organ and, again, her jaw and teeth. Interpol circulates composite sketches based on witness descriptions and the autopsy. The police force in several countries received them, but nobody recognizes her. 45 years pass before the case stirs again. The first surprise comes from a taxi driver who steps forward in 1991. He doesn't want his name used, but he says that when he picked her up at the hotel for a ride to the Bergen railway station, a man joined her in the car. This man was never tracked down. Another story surfaced in 2005. A man from Bergen, who had been 26 in 1970, says that he recognized her sketch immediately. He remembers seeing her 5 days before her body was found while he was hiking in the area. She wasn't dressed for a hike at all. She was, though, walking ahead of 2 men in coats who looked Southern. She looked like she wanted to say something to him but didn't. He went to someone he knew in the police at the time but was told to drop it. His name and the sighting never made it into the case file. When the case is officially reopened in 2016, the NRK brings in an American artist named Stephen Missel to create new sketches. At the same time, the NRK starts digging into the intelligence angle. Remember that the Norwegian intelligence was already looking into her as a possible spy in 1970, but what they didn't tell people was that a fisherman had gone to a security officer at one of the naval bases in Stavanger and said that he saw this woman watching military movements. Later, a 1970 December file marked secret shows that Commander Onarharm from the Norwegian Armed Forces pointed out that her travel dates line up with the top secret Penguin missile trials. The Penguin missile was a Norwegian-made short-to-medium-range anti-ship missile developed in the 1960s, and it's still in service today. It's known for being one of the first NATO missiles to use infrared homing instead of radar, which makes it harder to detect and jam. This commander also noted that personnel from Norwegian defense research establishments were staying in Stavanger hotels during these trials. Now, the files don't conclusively land on, hey, she's a spy, but it's clear that they were paying attention to her. The biggest breakthrough, though, comes from something that everybody had assumed was gone: her jawbone. The one that had been removed during her autopsy in 1970. It was handed to a professor of dentistry named Bang. He kept it in case someone recognized the dental work. After he died, everyone thought that it had been destroyed. A forensic doctor named Inga Morrell, who inherited the case file, had been told that the jaw was thrown away because it smelt bad. But when the NRK started asking questions, he goes looking and finds it deep in the cellar at the Haukeland University Hospital. This discovery gives the police a chance to use modern forensic techniques. The University of Bergen and Kripos begin isotope testing on her teeth. They look at the oxygen in the enamel to figure out what kind of water she drank growing up. They look at strontium to see what kind of soil and food shaped her early years. It's the first time Norwegian police have ever done isotope analysis on teeth. The results show that she probably was born around 1930 in Nuremberg. As a child, she moved closer to the French-German border. Her handwriting analysis supports this hypothesis. She was taught to write in a French school, and even though she told hotels that she was born between 1942 and 1945, her teeth put her closer at 40 at the time of her death. The dental work itself points to East Asia, Central Europe, or Southern Europe, or even South America, again, not exactly narrowing it down. DNA is the next step. It didn't exist in 1970s, but Haukeland Hospital still has tissue samples from her lungs, heart, adrenal gland, and her ovaries. The NRK and the police send them for DNA testing. While they wait, the NRK releases a documentary, and more than 150 people send in tips. The extended DNA profile eventually shows that she is of European descent. That makes the idea of her being an Israel agent less likely. Her mitochondrial DNA places her maternal line in the southeastern Europe or southwest Asia. There is also a clue that she may have traveled on a French passport based on an unidentified French national registration on one of her flights. In 2018, the NRK and the BBC World Service released the podcast Death in Ice Valley. Here, eyewitnesses and scientists add even more detail. The birthplace estimate tightens to southern Germany or the French-German border. She was probably raised in French-speaking Belgium. It's around this time that author Dennis Zacher Ask proposes a different angle. He looks at her travel routes, her habits of returning to the same places, her desire for anonymity, her behavior in hotels, and the men who never came forward. He suggests that she may have been a sex worker. He also believes someone else was present at the scene when she died, based on her condition and the evidence around her. So not exactly anything revolutionary. I mean, sex worker does sound like a compelling theory, but it isn't enough to put aside the whole espionage angle. A fact-checker named Moret Hegrath was digging through old material and finds herself reading article after article about this period. She eventually focuses on a banker from Geneva named Francis Genode. Francis is an interesting character. He met Hitler when he was young, and he never let go of that type of ideology. After the war, he built a private bank in Geneva and used his money and connections to support the Palestine resistance. In October of 1969, he met with Wadi Haddad in Beirut. Now, this guy was one of the most feared leaders of the Palestinian militants, and the two men shared common enemies, so it made sense for them to work closely together. The question then becomes whether any of this touches the Isdal woman. To figure that out, Moret asks the NZZ for Francis's travel dates. Because of his political activity, the Swiss Federal Office of Police had been watching him for years, and his travel records are in the Federal Archives in Bern. So the NZZ is able to get the list for 1970. Okay, so in the Isdal woman's notebook, there are two entries marked with a P. One is the Paris trip in late October. The other covers June 22nd to July 3rd. In her shorthand, it reads J, 22, PJ, 3. Right next to it is JJ4PL. The double J probably marks the shift from June to July. On July 4th, she leaves Paris for somewhere starting with an L. The meaning of the L has never been solved. Her Paris visit in the summer of 1970 overlaps with 2 short visits by Francis. According to surveillance report, he was in Paris on June the 26th and the 27th. He then flies to Beirut for a few days and then returns to Paris from July 3rd to the 5th. The last 2 days have a question mark next to them in the file. Now, the reason for his late June visit is unknown. Before he died, he told his biographer that he had met Haddad in Paris. Haddad entered France under a false identity. They met at the corner of Porte Milat and Avenue de Malakoff. Haddad wore a wig. In the few photos of him that do exist, he is bald, so he was known for disguises. And he even flew on Israel Airlines, so he wasn't traveling to Paris for just a casual chat. His next major operation was the hijacking of 3 airplanes, including a Swiss Air flight that happened in September of 1970. So this obviously raises a few questions. Was she in Paris at the same time as Francis and Haddad by coincidence, or was she a part of whatever was happening there? After Beirut, Francis returns to Paris again while she's still there. Was she meeting someone? Was she involved in something? There's also the practical mysteries. I mean, how did she pay for all of this travel, and how did she get so many passwords? Francis, he had money and connections. He lived in Belgium during the war while working for the Abwehr, and he used forged documents himself. After the war, he worked for the Swiss Red Cross in Brussels. He married twice, both to women he had met in Belgium. He and his second wife would travel there often. In 1970, the Swiss Federal Police recorded 2 of his visits to Belgium, and later a CIA report said that they were regular guests at a bed and breakfast in Nac. So if he had access to forged documents and Belgian contacts, he could have been the source of her many Belgian identities. He spoke French as well as German, so he could have been behind the strange German phrases she wrote on her hotel forms. But none of this explains what she was doing in Norway. Irette, the fact-checker, suggests one possibility: heavy water. Norway produced a large quantity of it. In 1970, Israel was promised 5 metric tons for its Dimona reactor. The delivery was tied to a promise that would have been useful for peaceful purposes. Because of the conflict in the Middle East, Norway delivered on only 1 ton. The shipment was kept secret for years. The Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs eventually confirmed it. If the Palestinians had learned about the shipment, they might have wanted to intervene. And if they wanted to intervene, someone would have needed to go to Norway. So this could explain why the Norwegian intelligence service shut down parts of the investigation. Neither Norway nor Israel wanted attention on the heavy water deal or on any of the plans that the Palestinians might have had. There is, however, a complication. If she was killed, she may have known the person who did it, or maybe there was more than one person. She had been seen with different men shortly before her death. After taking the first dose of sleeping pills, she seemed to have gone with someone to Isdalen. Whether she went there willingly or under a threat is unknown. Okay, so remember that guy from back in 2005 who said that he had told police about seeing her hiking, or while he was hiking rather, and she was followed by 2 men? Well, this guy told the BBC podcast that he thought these men looked hostile. Now, 2 men, and the last entry in her notepad still hasn't been solved. ML23NMM. The 23N likely marks November 23rd, the day she checked out of the Hordeheimen Hotel, took a taxi, and left her suitcases at the train station. 6 days later, her body was found in Isdalen. Do ML and MM stand for 2 men she planned to meet that day? Did something go wrong? Are they the reason that she never left the valley alive? Finally, in 2022, a man from Forbach, France, eventually steps forward and says that he knew her in the summer of 1970. According to him, they had a brief relationship. He remembers that she spoke several languages and had a Balkan accent. She dressed to look younger than she actually was, never shared anything personal, and often took scheduled calls from abroad. One day, he went through her belongings and found wigs and bright clothing that looked like they were meant for disguises. He even stole a photograph of her riding a horse and kept it. He suspected that she might be a spy, but didn't want to involve himself. But even with all that information, all that description, having a romance with this woman, he never says, hey, this was her name. And that's where things still stand today. As of now, nobody has ever been able to prove who she is, why she was in the areas that she was, or what actually happened to her on Isdalen. The investigation is still open, and the Isdal woman remains unidentified. She walked into Norway under one identity after another, and she left behind a mystery that still hasn't given up its last secret. Until someone somewhere recognizes her, that's where she'll stay. Thank you for wandering down this crooked path with me. I'm Amanda Joy, and may something strange guide your way tonight. Follow the path further. If this episode left you lingering in the shadows, there's more to explore. Follow at Down the Crooked Path on TikTok and Instagram for haunting visuals, behind-the-scenes lore, and updates on upcoming episodes. Every post is another breadcrumb deeper into the strange, the forgotten, and the beautifully unsettling. Stay curious and keep walking.